All right guys, we're out on the North Coosa River today and doing kind of one of the tried and true famous techniques on this entire river system. You know, this is swimming a jig in grass. Right now I've got a 5/16 ounce white swim jig with a flapping trailer and then a white vibrating jig. The difference is the swim jig is kind of like my 4-wheel drive shad imitating bait. I can throw it on top of the grass, I can throw it in woods, I can throw it under docks, and it's not gonna get hung very often. That vibrating jig, I have to throw it around something that it's not really gonna bump into much. It can deflect off wood, dock posts a little bit, but it can't come over a lot of thick vegetation. So I throw them together. A lot of times I'll throw them, you know, I pick up one, make one cast with it, pick up a different one, make one cast with it. And the main reason for that is I just want to fish the cover that I'm fishing as efficiently as possible. But when I'm fishing the heavier cover, I wanna make sure that I've got something that I can trigger that strike and I'm not gonna get hung up. I can get in and out of the cover really efficiently. So I feel like with that vibrating jig, I can be a little more efficient because I feel like I have a better chance of catching them all the way back to the boat with that bait. And I can just cover that water a little bit faster. I use the two simultaneously this time of year. Good one too. Really good one. That's a nice one right there. That's how you want to hook them. That's a good thing about throwing a moderate rod, throwing a vibrating jig, is you just seem to hook them a whole lot better when you got a little softer tip. Really, really nice one. Coosa River chunk right there. Look how they get built up here. Them fish love bait, that's why they're so fat. So all we're doing is kind of still trying to imitate a lot of the shad forage in the area, but we're just throwing a vibrating jig with a kind of a slender profile trailer on there. A lot of times whenever them fish get keyed on shad, you don't want, post spawn at least, you really don't want a big wide thumping trailer. So I like something a little bit more streamlined, but it's just a really good bait, you know, especially in the southeast, to cover a lot of water with really, really quickly and be efficient with it. You can throw it around wood, rocks, everything. That's just kind of one of those reasons that everybody has one laying on the front deck in the southeast especially, probably everywhere in the country. But it's a bait when it first came out, a lot of people seem to have problems landing fish on. That's because I'll show y'all kind of the mechanics of the blade. A lot of times if those fish eat that bait, the blade will fold down inside their mouth. Sometimes the blade will fold out, but when that blade folds down inside their mouth and you set the hook, a lot of times what it'll do is that blade will hit the top of their mouth and kind of make it where the hook point can't really penetrate if that blade hits them in the top of the mouth. So for me, I feel like the best way to counter that is when those fish eat it, to give them just an extra second to make sure those fish have turned one way or the other. Because if that bait's coming at you and they come behind it and eat it, and then that blade hits them in the top of the mouth, they don't really have any resistance in the front of their mouth. But if they turn sideways, no matter what that blade does, a lot of times you'll still hook them in the side of the mouth. So the best thing that I have found is to give those fish a second. And this right here is a 7'4", medium heavy, moderate. It's actually a moderate fast rod. It just has a little bit more tip. I have the tendency to jump on them. The vibrating jig is a bait, like I said, you need to give them a little bit of a second, and that softer tip just helps me do that. But this rod, whenever that tip shuts off, it's got a lot of power for throwing those vibrating jigs around grass and all kinds of stuff like that, rock, whatever those fish may be around. So this rod is a very important one for the technique that you're throwing. So the current conditions that we have today are, we got overcast and a little bit of wind. And for me, if I'm gonna stay shallow and try to fish, you know, a swim jig and a vibrating jig, a lot of times that's the conditions I want that makes me think that I can do it all day. And what that does is, those bait fish, they really, the shad in general, the brim, they like it whenever that sun's out. The shad, they really seem to move out deeper as soon as that sunlight hits the water. They'll move out from, you know, being up there in 2 or 3 foot out to that 7 or 8 foot depth. So whenever I've got those overcast, cloudy, windy conditions, I know it's gonna keep those shad shallow longer throughout the day. So that's whenever, if I'm gonna be stubborn and hard-headed and grind shallow with a couple of, you know, of my confidence baits, I really like for it to be overcast, especially in the post spawn. This is just a textbook spot one should be in. Oh, he almost got back. You can just, I mean, every shape, size, everything. I'm surprised we haven't caught a spotted bass yet, but everything's just up here feeding on these shad that are up here shallow right now. This is the time of year where the bass take advantage. Like, they've been spawning, the bluegill, everything's been taking advantage of them, trying to eat their fry, and they're getting payback right now, there's no doubt. So the last 2 bites that I've actually gotten have hit it probably 15 feet from the boat or closer. Like, just, I barely had any line out. And that's whenever it's really important, whenever they catch you off guard, to have that little bit slower tip. You can see how much this rod loads. It actually loads deeper into the tip than a lot of, you know, rods that are like this do. So that just helps kind of absorb some of that shock whenever they hit it that close to the boat. And I usually don't give them much time. I usually get on them pretty quick. So just having that little bit slower tip helps me out a lot to hook those fish. And you know, we've caught a few today and haven't lost one yet. And that's kind of a tough task for a bait like this. You know, landing them is really important. I know a lot of the guys at 13 spend a lot of time designing this rod for throwing vibrating jigs, and I think they knocked it out of the park with this one. So the way that I prefer to fish a swim jig, they call it the Alabama shake. And basically it looks like I'm working it extremely fast, but a lot of times if you shake it, what you can do is you can give that bait a lot of action and flair and make it be super erratic, and you're not actually moving it far. So a lot of times it's about the same speed as if you were just winding it super slow. I'm just keeping it really high in the water column and pulsing it a lot with my rod tip. And one really big key to this is to make sure you've got it on braided line. And the reason for braid is that line has no stretch. So every time I shake that rod, it gives that jig the action that I want it to have. So if I'm throwing one on fluorocarbon around boat docks or something, a lot of times I'll just pump it a whole lot slower and make it kind of swim through the water. You can't give it that same kind of a jerk and flare if you're not using braided line. So it's really, really important that you have braided line. And when you set the hook on one in the edge of the grass, you want to have braided line also. It's another really nice one. Barely got him hooked. Got him in here though. That's a really, really good one for here. Love that bite. Old swim jig, 3.5 pounder. That's hard to beat right there. That's why we alternate, because I've been throwing that vibrating jig around the rocks, pick that up, throw it in the edge of some grass, and catch a really, really nice one. So, I mean, that's always fun right there. That's what you want. All right, guys, we're gonna go through the 2 rods that I was using this morning to kind of chase those bass around that were falling around the bait fish. You know, these 2 baits really set up extremely similarly. You want to fish them in kind of the same areas. You just want to use one over the other in very certain circumstances, but they're worlds apart as far as the rods, the reels, the line that you want to use. You know, we'll start off with the vibrating jig rod. This is the 13 Fishing Muse Black. This is a new rod designed specifically for vibrating jigs, chatterbaits, whatever you want to call them. This is a 7'4" medium heavy mod fast. And for me, I really wanted it to be moderate fast. I didn't want it to be straight moderate, because when you get around overhanging bushes, you get around boat docks, anything like that, a moderate rod is very difficult to have consistency skipping with. So I wanted it to be that mod fast action, but it's very important that it is a little bit moderate. And the reason for that is when those fish eat that bait, you really want to give them a second to turn. Like if your bait's coming at you and those fish eat it, you really want to give those fish a second to turn left, right, or down, and your landing percentage is going to go through the roof with that. So rod's extremely important. I like that 7'4" because whenever I am just trying to bomb cast it down grass lines, all that type of stuff, I get a little bit more distance out of it, having that little bit longer length. I use a 6.8 to 1 gear ratio, 13 Fishing Concept C. I like to go down to a 6.8 anytime I'm winding something, because I have the tendency to go a little bit too fast and it feels like I just get more bites throwing that 6.8. I've got it on 20-pound Sunline shooter fluorocarbon, standard vibrating jig, 3/8 ounce. You know, that little tail goes absolutely crazy in the water behind that blade. It's obvious this is the right trailer. This is my #1 go-to vibrating jig setup. I throw it from Florida, and we go up north, I'll be throwing it up north. So this is just a bait that is a confidence bait for me and a lot of people, and that's the best setup that I have found for it right there. So that moderate action helps me land a ton of fish. And then throwing this in very, very similar situations, but everything as far as the rod, reel, line, all that stuff is completely different. This is a 7'1", medium heavy, Muse Black, 50-pound Sunline Braid, 5/16 Untamed tackle swim jig. This one I actually designed. Got a little flap and crawl trailer on there, just white, trying to imitate shad. I like that 7'1" rod because when I'm shaking that bait and I'm working it really fast, that little bit lighter rod especially up there towards the tip. It's just less fatigue, you can fish it all day. I've bounced around on rods for a swim jig a lot. I've threw a 7.6, I've threw a 7.3. I'm really starting to like this 7.1 a ton. You know, this is a completely different type of reel. This is an 8.3 to 1 gear ratio. It's the same reel, Concept C, just completely different as far as the gear ratio and stuff like that. I want this bait to be moving fast all the time, so I keep that reel as high speed as I possibly can, making more casts throughout the day, all that type of stuff. I don't get a lot of random bites on this bait. Like on the vibrating jig, I may get a random bite almost to the trolling motor, way off the bank, all that type of stuff. On this bait right here, usually the bites come from exactly where I think they're gonna come from, so I wanna get that bait in as fast as possible and make another presentation. So these rods are completely different, but we fish them in almost the same situation. So these are the two Muse rods that I use for chasing shad around in the southeast. I can't even hardly talk today, they're biting. There we go. You can just see how healthy these fish are that are up here on this hard cover. That was another one off the rocks right there. You can see I've changed back to the vibrating jig. Just absolute butterballs. Like, look at how built they are. You can tell these fish are done spawning and they are like feeding up and taking advantage of the brim spawn and then also the shad spawn, which is what these last three have been on. So, I mean, just absolute butterballs up here on the Coosa River. So, love fishing like that. So much fun. Just let him get back down there to eat. He knew he was filming.